Friday, 5 o'clock-ish in Houston, well, Spring, Texas, the Woodlands, Texas, wherever. Today's reading is entitled Living a Spiritual Life. It's from the Science of Mind magazine, The Daily Guides. It's written this month by Reverend Dr. Margaret Stortz. So I decided, after I'd pre-read the reading, to start looking up some definitions of spirituality, which were not very thrilling. I thought, well, if I go to the Oxford English Dictionary, this is the concise one. I thought I should get some really good definitions, but I wasn't too thrilled with some of them because they just kind of repeat the word spiritual, which really doesn't do anybody any good. The one I found about spiritual was this: the inner nature of man. Man is meaning human and not male. So I thought that was a pretty good definition, and it actually fits in with the reading for today. As I said, it's called Living a Spiritual Life. The first quote from Ernest Holmes today is called Keys to Wisdom, page 22. Keys to Wisdom, page 22, which says, "We are one in God, and God is one in us." And if you want to translate that, the inner nature of man, then those things fit together. Whoa. This is, hold on a second. My mouse decided to have a life of its own. That's it's kind of like I was nothing to do with spirituality, but I was at a couple of 3, 4, 5 meetings today. And at one of them, we were talking about self-drive cars, and one of the people there has got a Tesla Cybertruck, and explaining how it was great and how it was wonderful when it was driving itself. And then I was talking to other people at the same meeting, and they're saying, God, I would never trust a Cybertruck. I would never trust a self-driving car of any sort. So you get wildly different views. And it was the same when I looked at the definition of spiritual and spirituality. The views were all across the board, or the definitions were all across the board, which tells me that the dictionary, or the writers of the dictionary, really couldn't focus on one thing for it. And some of them were just, well, they were just not really accurate, talking about an ecclesiastical life, which to me is not spiritual. I think the inner nature of man was actually the better one. So, anyway. In the Science of Mind textbook, this is what Ernest Holmes says on page 503. And trust me, 503 is not the end of the book. It's a big book. God is greater. This is a good one. God is greater than all human mistakes, and in God alone is there peace and happiness. So to me, that says when we find our spiritual essence, we find that quiet place within, then whatever mistakes we've made, then that's the place to start letting them go. Don't beat up on yourself. Yes, make retribution if you have to do for what you've done that's hurt other people or yourself. But that's the end of the story. You move on from there. You leave all that behind and you move on. Do you learn from your mistakes? Yes. And that's what I take from that. And then Reverend Margaret is speaking from the perspective of people who are students of spirituality. Not everybody who reads the Science of Mind magazine or listens to readings like this are, well, they wouldn't consider themselves students of spirituality. So if you do, you do. If you don't, you don't. Stuff still applies, and I'll explain how in a minute. So often we students of spirituality long to live what we consider a spiritual life. Fair enough. Well, the truth is, we already are. If our belief in unity with God is a great truth, we already are irrevocably connected with the universal presence, and we do not have to worry about becoming so. In other words, if you believe that you're an expression of the one, then that in itself is enough. There was a famous mystic in the Middle Ages called Meister Eckhart, who the Vatican didn't like. They're not too keen on mystics anyway. They weren't. Nowadays, I guess it's different. But back then, they didn't like mystics because they didn't preach the same idea of God, quote unquote, as the church did. And he said, if the only prayer you ever said in your life was thank you, it will be enough. So often we just make things way too complicated. Then Reverend Margaret goes on to say, what may be confusing about our spirituality is that we also are immersed in human experience, as Pierre Tau de Chardin wrote. And some of the things we experience in our humanity may not look very spiritual. Perhaps our search should be about how well our spiritual inheritance translates into our human lives. How do we express that in everyday life? We could ask, am I emulating deep spiritual qualities in my everyday life? Am I kind, loving, creative, compassionate, and willing to learn? And to me, those two things equate. The spiritual qualities and am I kind, loving, creative, compassionate, and willing to learn? I think that's what's meant by spiritual qualities, among others, love being the greatest one, of course. On the other hand, am I hateful, mean-spirited, gossipy, critical, and close-minded? Am I moving away from that? And the real answer to those is yes and no, because I don't think there's anybody on the planet who is totally and completely loving, creative, compassionate, and willing to learn. Most of the time, you could say, some people 99% of the time, but I don't think there's one person on the planet who could say 100% that's what they're doing. And by the same token, I don't think there's anybody on the planet 100% hateful, mean-spirited, gossipy, critical, and close-minded. We're all somewhere in the middle, and we're all somewhere on that spectrum. We're all somewhere on this spiritual journey. Some of us are, quote, ahead of others, unquote. Some of us are behind others, quote, unquote. The main thing is to recognize that you are on the spiritual journey. To me, that's the main thing. And once you realize you're on it, then things will start to change and you will start to look for the things that support you, support life, support humans, support the planet, etc. So these are my takes. I'm not saying that they're the only answers, but they're my answers. The ways in which we answer these questions will give us clues into how well we use our infinite power, the power of good, if you like, that's flowing through us. The good thing is that these personal uses of our divinity are not etched in stone. We can self-correct at any time, and in fact, enlightened self-correction is our great tool. The ones of us on a spiritual journey are always self-correcting. We can change our minds. We can be open to inspiration and guidance. We can modify our behaviors. We can live lives more reflective of our natural spirituality. And we can bring more light, more of our light into the world than ever before. So the answer isn't to become perfect, because I don't think in this human experience that there have been very many people on the planet who have been perfect. Maybe none. I don't know. I mean, a lot of people would say Jesus was perfect. And that's about the only person I can think of who might classify as that. In some religions where you have gods and goddesses, some of those might be deemed perfect. But by and large, in this human experience, very few, if any, humans have actually been perfect, which should be good news to us because it simply means everybody is on that journey. And some of us ultimately are able to make that total absolute connection. And that is called enlightenment. How many people on this planet have been enlightened? I don't know. The story goes that the Buddha became enlightened. Have there been other enlightened beings? Yes, I think Jesus was an enlightened being. I think Muhammad was on his way to being an enlightened being. I think Moses, Abraham, and the other great patriarchs I think some of the Indian gurus and saints have been on their way to becoming totally enlightened. Um, have there been lots of people who've been enlightened? I don't know. You don't know, but I do know this. Every single person on this planet is on a journey. And I believe that journey is to become more like the enlightened being that we ultimately are capable of being. Will it happen in one lifetime? I don't know. Will it happen in multiple lifetimes? I don't know. The Buddha claimed that he could see himself through loads of different incarnations. Not only that, he said he could see himself in incarnations in previous kalpas. You know, in Hinduism, there's a one section of Hinduism, there's a belief that the universe exists for a specific length of time, a kalpa. Then it goes into non-existence, and then it comes back into existence again and another kalpa, and so on and so forth, which keep repeating forever. And the Buddha said he could see himself in previous incarnations in this kalpa and in previous kalpas. So this is a continuous journey, and it's like the never-ending story. It's like the never-ending story. Ernest Holmes believed that we evolve in spirals. That we go up in spirals, and the spiral says you go up, but before you go up again, you come down again. If you think about a spiral, you go up, come down. The direction is always upwards, but at every turn of it, there's a learning, and those downward things in the spiral are learnings. It's what we're learning, and it's good. So our job is to keep moving upwards. And I believe that that goes on forever. But what you believe about that, well, that's entirely up to you. All that I ask you to do is spend some time in some kind of spiritual practice, meditation, mindfulness, and however you define prayer, which is unifying with the one source, and also claiming your divine rights in that one source. So that is me for today, apart from the affirmation, which I am the place where God stands forth in the world as me, what we get every day. I willingly bring my divine good into life as I reveal God more clearly and lovingly than ever, as I reveal the true essence of myself more clearly and lovingly than ever, if you like. Express it whichever way you want. So I appreciate the opportunity to do these readings, to send them out on different social media. I hope they help people. And if you're not very spiritual, you just want to be more at home in yourself and to be more at home in the world and help the world be a better place. Hey, that in itself is spiritual because you're moving out beyond yourself. You're connecting with your inner essence and you're moving out beyond yourself. And that is what it means to me. Let me know what you think. And this is coming up to the weekend in this part of the world. Have a wonderful weekend. For whenever the weekend comes, have a great weekend. Have a great next week. And Reverend Lisa will be back with, I think she's still on the Voice Celestial, that huge epic by Ernest Holmes and his brother Fenwick. So until next time, namaste.